The place where this took place, strangely enough, can be visited, even though the Holy Land itself, at this point in time, cannot. The angels did not want this most holy place to be desecrated, given that it is the place where the Madonna had lived, had encountered heaven in the person of Gabriel, and after the moment of exile had eventually lived with St. Joseph and the child Jesus. The walls of the Holy House were and are saturated with grace and prayer, and it could not be allowed to be done away with. And so it came miraculously, and it is true, and there's only to examine carefully the foundations and see exactly that everything corresponds. It is what it would have been. It was placed somewhere for 3 years in the area, and then it was brought further to our area in Italy, near Ancona. Now, it's kind of important to be aware of all that was happening in that small house. Place yourself there, see this young damsel in prayer, and suddenly she is visited. She has obviously given her virginity to the Lord, has no intention of marrying, and she is troubled. And then explanation comes that there would be this miraculous intervention of the Holy Ghost. And then only she consents, let it be. And at that point, it starts to happen. However, notice that there is a phrase in this greeting which indicates that the preparation had already taken place, full of grace. Therefore, what happened at her own conception was a cosmic moment. And it is logical that the Lord of hosts would not have spared anything to make the habitation of the Most High perfect. At that point, when the Mother of the Blessed Virgin conceived, there was a mystical break. At that point, for the first time, the curse was not transmitted. So there was already at that point a beginning of an end. Here, the re-establishment of order in the cosmos began to happen, and the demon in exorcism has been obliged to admit that she, her Immaculate Heart, is the one place to which she has never had access. Do you see what that means? So, there is more to this than meets the eye, as we can also see from stuff which has come out here and there from encounters with the dark side. He was, as were all the angels, submitted at the beginning of the angelic creation to this test. And it would seem that he had to recognize someone greater than he, but in an apparently lower form. He would not submit to this. Now, it would seem that the Madonna would have had authority over this supreme angel. He would not, therefore, admit either to adore the humanity of the Lord or to have this creature above him. Do you see why this perfect envy came in at that point, and is the mark of Satan and those who serve him, directly or indirectly, right through time? Hatred, envy, and jealousy, the green-eyed monster. He was, remember, the most brilliant of angels, but he had not been given that fullness of vision without passing this test, which he failed, and failed miserably, and failed with glee, because he was He was going to get all the angels with him to rebel. Can you imagine the cosmic battle that involved? When asked how many angels were created, a theologian answered an infinite number. And therefore we're handling a third of kind of infinity. It's a huge number of fallen angels. And St. Michael, who was not the most brilliant of angels, was given power at that time. And of course he now is the supreme angel. And he is still in combat against all these dark angels who wish us harm. A large number of them are around, tempting us all the time. But he's been obliged to admit that he has not, for instance, permission to enter into a family where the rosary is said. Do you see that this hatred to the Madonna is there, and she is still crushing his heel? Remember that next time you're too much in a hurry not to say the rosary. In 1792 was born a child by the name of Giovanni Ferretti. He was pious, said his prayers, loved the Madonna, but he had a form of epilepsy. He prayed, the family prayed, and the Madonna intervened, and he was healed. He went to seminary, was ordained, eventually he became a bishop, and eventually he became Supreme Pontiff, and took the name of Pius. He was Pius IX. I go back further in time, to the 1600s, in Spain. There was a series of apparitions and messages to a pious nun, and the whole series of events is referred to as Our Lady of Good Success. And way back, already she did say that the same Pope would proclaim her Immaculate Conception, as would also proclaim papal infallibility. It was the by now blessed Pius IX, Pio IX, who had to fight also so many battles on the political field, because precisely there were servants of that same other guy trying to attack the church. But there were things which happened in this time which are interesting. Most of you will have around you, or in your pocket or on your rosary, the miraculous medal, 1830. A hidden nun, not even professed at the time. And her angel, it would seem, tapping her on the shoulder while she was asleep, taking her through the cloisters of Rue de Bac to the chapel, and she was able to place her hands on the lap of that same Madonna, who gave this medal, with written on it, Ô Marie, conçu son péché, priez pour nous qui avons recours à vous. Conçu son péché, notice, conceived without sin. So, in 1854, not because of that, but it probably would have reached the ears of the Pope, this came out with daring. That she was, in fact, conceived without original sin, in prevision of the merits of her son, because that had been the problem for theologians all along. Because God is outside time. But notice that in 1858, 4 years later, when Kathleen Bourret, the damsel who had seen the Madonna, was hiding in Reuilly, serving the old people, she came again, and she blurted out, "C'est le même!" It's the same one. She recognized the continuity. Years ago, when still a Baptist, pretty anti-Catholic, I was clearing out, or I was with my father in San Basin, where my grandfather was. I think he was still alive. And we happened that evening to watch the old black and white film, The Song of Bernadette. Ooh. 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 That got me thinking. Now, it's rare that a television film especially can get one thinking theologically, but this one did. By the way, the best films are the old ones. They're safer. And it was clear that if that happened, our outfit was incomplete. It wasn't enough, but it got me thinking. And you know that sometime later, because I had doubts of faith, I went to one of the evangelicals on the staff of our school, Cardiff High. He took me to the lab where he worked, sat me on a stool and sat me down and talked through it. I wanted to know, can you prove the existence of God? You know what he said? He said, well, there are places on earth where things happen, and he mentioned Lourdes. Now, he was an evangelical, anti-Catholic, but he recognized that there were miracles going on there, which is interesting. Anyway, this was heaven authenticating what actually had already been declared. Do you remember the story? This rather gruff priest initially got a brush at her. When she came back, having followed through his instructions, wanting to know what her name was, when she came back confused, unable to know what it meant, but trying to repeat exactly what she'd heard, and she came to him and she said, l'Immaculée Conception. She said, what? So he copped on. This was the same. It was herself. From that moment on, defended her. And also indicated logically that having such a privilege, she ought to give herself as a virgin to the Lord, which she did. And by the way, she is incorrupt at Nevers, a beautiful damsel still. And by the way, as comes through very clearly in the film, that same envy and jealousy comes through there, but there in the consecrated life. She was treated badly. The novice mistress, it seems, knew and wasn't happy that this should happen to someone of such a low degree, passing over her. It happens. Might be your case as well on something. Do you know that that same demon did mention, when he started to make noises in the Holy House of Loreto, that his brother Gabriel had been there? Do you know also that in recent times in Mexico, during exorcism there, he came out with this. Now, before she came along, this was all mine. Abortion is his, as was child sacrifice by the hundred. These tribes, the Aztecs and the Incas, meant business, as does Satan today, who delights in blood, the blood of the innocent. And it seems that every time there's an abortion, a new demon or two is launched into the air with more power. So, my friends, the battle goes on. And what, until fairly recently, was fairly well camouflaged, is now pretty overt. Get to the top and strike. My friends, Our Lady, and not the other guy, has the last word. Remember the promise? In the end, Russia will be converted. A period of peace will follow. In a word, my immaculate heart will triumph.